What should be the mission statement of every single church in the world? Hi, welcome to today's little lesson. We've been talking in our last two previous little lessons about the subject of making disciples. And so the question that I posed at the beginning of this little lesson is certainly related to that. What should be the mission statement of every church in the world? I've traveled a lot. I've been a Christian since, my teenage years. I'm 59 years old as I'm talking to you right now. So I've been a Christian for, about 4 decades. And I've been in the ministry almost as long as that. Traveled in 80 some different countries of the world, spoke in churches and so forth, spoken to ministers, so I have a little bit of experience interacting with the body of Christ. I read a lot of books, listened to a lot of sermons, been to a lot of churches. And I'm always a little bit surprised, not always, but often, very often surprised when I read the mission statement of various ministries and churches. Because what I'm expecting to find is that their mission statement is going to be the mission statement that Jesus gave to the church, right? They would think that. But here's a church that says our mission is to help believers live the abundant life in Jesus Christ, fulfilling, their destiny and walking in all the blessings that God has provided through them. Well, that's okay, but it's actually not okay. Let me just be perfectly honest with you. If that's the mission of your church, you need to either shut down your church or change the mission, because the mission ought to be of every church and every ministry to make disciples. And what are disciples? Well, we've already seen initially a disciple is somebody, according to Jesus in John chapter 8, who continues in the words of Christ and is being progressively set free from sin, becoming more holy. And secondly, that person is a person who's learning to obey all of Christ's commandments, because that's what he said. Go make disciples, teaching them to obey everything that I commanded. And I'll add that a disciple and honestly, it's only the disciples who truly believe in Jesus. If you're not a disciple of Christ, you don't believe in Bible Jesus. You might believe in American Jesus or some other Jesus, but you don't believe in Bible Jesus unless you're a disciple. So Jesus was preaching one time, and we read in Luke chapter 14 and verse number 25, now large crowds were going along with him. There you have it. In some people's estimation, and many ministers and pastors' estimation, well, wow, Jesus was successful. The goal had been reached. Big crowds, because that's how we define success. Well, look how many people are coming on Sunday morning. Big crowds. Well, was Jesus happy with those big crowds? Had he reached his goal? Did he lift his hands up to the Father and say, Father, take a look. Aren't you proud? I'm a mega church pastor now. Because look at all these people that come to me once a week for an hour. No, that's not what he did. So he says to them in verse number 26, in the very next verse, he turns and he says to these large crowds, if anyone comes to me. Now that sounds kind of like kind of like he means you come to me, like you're interested in me, and you're professing, that we have some kind of a relationship going on, and you've come to me. But look at this. And he does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life. He cannot be my disciple. So there you have it. Who's going to argue with Jesus about what is the proper definition of a disciple, right? I mean, that's Jesus. He ought to know. And he said, go into all the world, make disciples, baptize them, teach them. And here's the characteristic of a disciple. You can't be my disciple unless you hate the people that you naturally would love the most. your closest relatives, right? Come on. Father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, even yourself. Yes, even your own life. He cannot be my disciple. Now, of course, looking at the rest of the scripture, looking at that in context of the rest of the Bible, very few people are coming to the conclusion that Jesus meant literally that we have to hate our loved ones. Because if you hate your loved ones, then you wouldn't love them at all anymore. And we know the scripture teaches, for example, husbands, love your wives. We're supposed to love our children. We're supposed to honor our parents, right? That's in the Ten Commandments. So we don't take Jesus in the strictest literal sense in this requirement to be a disciple, but taking it at its bare bones minimum, regarding what he must mean by this. At bare bones minimum, he must mean that your love for your loved ones has got to be lesser to a significant degree than your love for me. I become the supreme person whom you love. And if in fact your loved ones demand that you give them greater love than love for me, you tell them no. If God's telling you to do something and your mom or your wife says, don't do it, and you say, okay, I won't do it because I love you. No, big mistake. You're not a disciple. Jesus becomes the one you love the most, more than anyone, more than anything. And if you don't have that, you're not a disciple. You think about that, how outrageous that would be for anyone to expect such devotion, except God. Because, the Lord said way back in the Old Testament, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so from the beginning, God's saying, I deserve your deepest devotion, your highest love more than anybody else. And when Jesus says this in Luke chapter 14 and verse number 26, you can't be my disciple unless you hate your loved ones, that's tantamount to claiming to be God. Or the only other alternative is that he's a lunatic. And Jesus did not have the credentials of a lunatic. He had the credentials of God. All right, well, we're out of time for today. I think I'll talk about this a little bit more in our next little lesson as we continue in Luke chapter 14. Thanks for joining me. God bless.